Hello, and welcome to our video interview today with Victoria Rennoldson, author and coach, and she's going to be talking about her new book, Become a Global Leader. And the title of our conversation is Becoming a Global Leader, Amplifying Your Impact and Communicate Across Cultures. So, Victoria, it's lovely to see you here.
Thank you so much, Fiona. Really excited to join you for this conversation.
Brilliant, thanks. So I'll just give people a little bit about your background. You're a multi-award winning coach, speaker and facilitator. And of course, you had a global background. You studied languages and also worked abroad. And I think your role at the moment is helping professionals and teams to thrive in their global careers, amplifying their impact, as you say in the book, speaking up confidently and communicating clearly, and of course, connecting across cultures. So that's very much on message for our global audience. So just first, tell us a bit about your background and how you embarked on such an interesting global career.
Well, thank you, Fiona, and really appreciate the introduction. And yes, I mean, culture has always been part of my journey, part of what has always motivated me and excited me. So, from my background studying languages, German and Russian, and living and working abroad, to my first career. So I started my career in marketing. I worked in brand marketing for very large food and drink organizations in FMCG. And I was always part of global teams. And one of the things that I really found myself noticing in my 12 years as I progressed my career there was just recognizing that the way people communicate, the way people interact with each other, how teams work, how effective leaders are, really have a cultural nuance to them. And what I saw was that sometimes, that worked really well and people were really successful as they relocated to new roles. But in other circumstances, it didn't land well. And there were frustrations and small things that built up, but ultimately led to really quite a lot of tension within teams. And it was that moment when I really recognized this that I thought, this is something I want to do something about. And that is when I really got into this space around global leadership, communication, and cultural intelligence, and been running this business, working with organizations, global and also expanding over the last 11 years.
So what do you mean by cultural intelligence,
That
Victoria?
is a brilliant question. And for me, where I started was very much, I had a lot of requests for cultural training. So, UK or British cultural training. I'm based in London, the UK, often working with people relocating to the UK, either individually or through their organization, and we do team workshops. And what I would find is that, yes, I could absolutely do that. But I was often questioning, what version of British culture do you want me to talk about here? Because clearly, even for the UK, fairly small place compared to other countries, still quite complex. And it's kind of like, what version do you want me to talk about? Because is that London or is that Scotland? Is that what industry? What department is that person working in? So I kind of felt for a long time that cultural awareness was important, of course, and there are generalizations and research that really helps you understand some of the, I suppose, introduction to the topic. But I wanted to go deeper. And so when I discovered cultural intelligence, particularly, I am certified and associate trainer with the Cultural Intelligence Center, a global organization. What I found was this was what I was looking for, a way for us to develop capabilities. So, not just knowledge, but real capabilities that we can measure and progress in the way that individuals and teams function, but also how do they relate to each other so that they're effective in multicultural environments. And so, this approach that is very embedded in my work is very much about helping individuals to recognize that they're more than their national identity or their passport. We're all very, very complex culturally. So, it's really about understanding yourself, having a profile insight into your cultural intelligence profile, but then really understanding the team and the power in understanding what you adapt in your strategies and behaviors to be more effective, either as the leader of that team or if you're part of the team working together, contributing to progressing forwards.
And what brought you to the idea of writing a book then?
Yeah. So the work I've been doing, I wrote the book last year, so in my 10th year of business. And I felt that having worked with everybody from individuals and small organizations growing through to some of the largest multinational organizations in the world, that I felt that there were experiences and learnings that I wanted to share more widely. And so cultural intelligence is a core part of my work, but I've built it into an approach where there are four key pillars that I see as being really critical to becoming a global leader. Those four pillars being confidence, clarity, being able to handle the challenging conversations. But ultimately, and the most important one in my view, in the current moment that we're in, is this idea of connection, being able to connect with cultural intelligence, being able to bridge across cultures, but also ultimately knowing how to connect with people, human to human, having conversations, which sounds so simple and so basic, but actually is super challenging. It's not easy in our current moments to do this, and yet we need it, I find, in our organizations and teams more than ever.
And of course, you've got another layer, of course, with AI coming in and disrupting things. And I think you're interested, aren't you, in how that interacts. And then there is the age-old thing of people working in silos.
Yeah, so confidence is a really interesting pillar because what I have discovered through my work, whether I'm working with people who are early career, mid career, or incredibly senior, I work with MDs, CEOs of their business units. And what I've discovered really fascinatingly is that confidence is a question at every stage. And that's particularly important and relevant to people listening and watching this because when you change your context, when you move from one familiar context where you've been very successful, either as the leader or in your contribution in your work, and then you shift that context and you're in an environment where perhaps there is different forms of diversity. So the mix of people you're working with is very different. The environment is very different. You may be still speaking the same language potentially, but ultimately there are going to be these cultural nuances, these little moments where what is usual and normal to you, what you consider, and I'm going to put this in inverted commas, professional behavior, may suddenly be not quite how it is where you are in the new environment. And that can be super challenging. It's challenging for everybody at every level, but it shifts your confidence and it brings up questions. I've worked with, for example, very recently, some exceptionally senior leaders, very experienced, 25 years, 30 years experience, who have moved to the UK from a European country. They are working in the construction industry. They're working in a very complex environment in a JV. And, what they thought to be true about their leadership style, what has made them super successful in the past, is not landing in the same way. And that's where confidence comes in. So, confidence for me is always about coming to knowing who you are, knowing what you bring, the value you bring, but also recognizing that confidence isn't like a light switch that stays on. It's meant to go up and down. So our ability in leading ourselves, regardless of where we are in terms of our job titles, we all have to lead ourselves. And that part of that job is knowing what you're about, what you bring, reminding yourself and recognizing that when you shift those contexts, it can be super challenging and that's normal.
So this construction team, was the confidence issue about their style of leadership, or was it about their different approach to management?
Yeah. So I think what was interesting was it raised questions about for the first time, and I think a long time, about how effective they were being. So things, the way they were operating, the way that they expected people to respond to them as a leader was not happening in the same way. And that can be quite unsettling because you're relying on methodologies, on approaches, on motivating people in certain ways. And if that's not engaging people, then that's tricky. And if I strip it back to a real example, even the way, like the questions that were coming up in those facilitations that I was doing with this group of leaders was that around even how do I even get to know people? How do I create some form of social connection? And so this was somebody, one person raising that question was coming from France. And they were talking about, at lunchtime, there'd be a very set moment to pause, to go for lunch, to get to know each other, to have conversation, to eat. And that wasn't happening in the UK for them. So they were confused about, okay, but how do I then create this social connection, this moment? Something so simple like lunch, or how do you have coffee? Like these moments are very important part of, they're not just nice to have, they're important parts of how you create that sense of team and sense of connection. So yes, a very important question, Fiona. I think the answer is both on the confidence. They felt it on both levels.
We're recording this round about International Women's Day. So are there confidence issues that you pick up in particular for women and at different ages and stages of life and their leadership journey?
I think that's a great question. Absolutely. And I think, I don't exclusively work with women, but I do obviously support a lot of women as they're going through these transitions, relocations, expanding their global leadership. My feeling is that women are more likely to raise the questions and self-doubts about, which ultimately might be holding them back. So that, it does depend on the individual. Some people are very happy to put themselves forward for the promotions, put themselves, up for the internal moves within their organizations. But what I find is either I'm working with women at that crossroads before they're just about to make the upwards movement, so promotion or a bigger role. But also, I find I'm ending up working with a lot of women as well individually who are already in the role but feel exposed. And I think that's the difference that I see, is that more women are open to saying, actually, I feel quite exposed in this space. Even though I know in theory I can do this, in theory I've got the capabilities, the knowledge, the expertise, there's something holding me back. And that's where this confidence pillar is so critical, because we all need it, regardless of whether somebody appears to have made it and have got the job title and the role, there are still doubts that come up. And I want to normalize that, to recognize that, confidence is meant to be this curvy journey that goes up and down. It's what we do with it, though. It's about recognizing and managing yourself when you're in those low moments and bring yourself back up with the energy, with the leadership presence, executive presence, to really projecting how you're showing up in your role.
So it's about a personal brand as well, I suppose, or
Yeah.
developing that all the
Yeah.
way through your career. So how do you help people along that journey, and what is a personal brand?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a brilliant question, because some people will hear that and go, ew, no, I don't want to, like, what is that personal brand thing? I don't want that. I don't want to sell myself. It sounds ick. But look, I think there's just a reality. And there's a fantastic quote, which I can't remember the person who said it now, but what they basically said is, whether you like it or not, everybody has a personal brand. Like, you're being experienced every single moment in every single day by people. And so they're going to be creating an impression of you that over time creates your reputation. So you've got a choice. Either you just let that happen organically and you let people, interpret that personal brand. Alternatively, you're quite conscious about it and you really think about, okay, what is it I do really represent? Like, what is important to me? What are I call it your unique ingredients? What is it that really makes me different from somebody else with the same job title as me in the same organization? How is it I want to show up? This is so important, because if you know how to define this, you can start intentionally cultivating that. You can start intentionally thinking about, okay, so how would I engage in the meeting if that's what I want to be showing up as? How would I be presenting? How would I be creating my conversations? And it really starts to help you then think about, how are you then developing the way that you are speaking, communicating, how you develop your relationships? So it's about being intentional. And when we're intentional, that helps you towards whatever that career goal looks like for you. That's why it really kind of matters.
And what about the challenges of disruption? So,
Mm,
new technologies across different industry sectors, whether you're in manufacturing, the car sector, oil and gas, energy, financial sector, there's things disrupting. Plus, there is the AI and the AI tool and robotics. So, how do you help people prepare for the future and steady the ship, steady the people that they're working with, and hopefully helping them to understand how these things can be used as a tool to support
yeah.
the human centered approach to their role?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's just so much happening in the world right now, whether we're talking, as you say, AI or the tech or the disruption in the workplace. Obviously, geopolitically, at the time of this recording, there's a huge amount going on. So there are a lot of like factors coming together and crunching at the same time. And what I know to be true is that if you want to go and find it, there is plenty of data and research that supports why things like AI and tech are terrible for jobs and the fears of everybody losing their job. Equally, you can find a lot of research that talks about the opportunities, the job creation, the new job markets that are going to open up. So it's really therefore about, the way that I see it is really understanding, how do you want to use things like AI and tech to enable you, to support you in what you do. So whoever's listening to this, it doesn't matter what your job role is, what your industry is, everybody is impacted. Wherever you're based around the world, everybody is impacted by this. So you've got a choice. Are you going to be scared of it, or are you going to lean into it? And so the way that I see things is, this is the opportunity. We can use, of course, the AI and tech to enable what's going on right now. But there's a really important thing we have to recognize. We don't need to allow, or we don't need to see it as AI replacing us. In fact, I have a really strong belief, and a really strong kind of approach on this, which is, I think this is the time when we need to be really paying attention, investing in human capabilities more than ever. And in fact, already before AI came along, there's lots of research that talks about, from Deloitte, talks about the people skills gaps people are seeing in new hires, about how people are struggling to communicate effectively, and that's holding them back in their careers. So what I'm really kind of passionate about is helping people to recognize, yes, we all need to upskill in AI and tech, whatever we do, and whether we're running our own businesses, working in large multinationals or small ones. We all need this, but we also need to really focus in on our human capabilities. And by that, I mean things like how you think critically, how you're able to be creative, and then really important human capabilities. How do you build trust? How do you build relationships? How do you ultimately work with people? And that's where what I'm expert in my field, communication, cultural intelligence, connection, are really, really critical parts of this. And that is also going to be, in now and in the future, our human differentiating factors. This is what we can do uniquely. AI can do lots for us, but ultimately, to build trust, we have to do that human to human. And I think this is the piece that I sort of talk to, that, this is our moment to be adaptable. Charles Darwin, back in the day, he knew about adaptability, right? He knew about species adapt, and those that adapt survive. I think we're in a moment, not quite so dramatic of survival, but certainly, the people who are going to do well are going to be the most adaptable. They know that their human capability skills, communication, connection, being able to bridge across cultures, will put them in really the best places to succeed.
Yes, excellent. And then, of course, people teams are working virtually and there are virtual collaborations all over the world. You've also mentioned the different cultural intelligence differences to navigate. Have you got some tips for cohesing a team across virtual environments and indeed intelligence? Some sort of practical things people can take away with them.
Yeah, I think this is really important point, and this is the reality for many of the clients that I support, teams and individuals. You're not just navigating multicultural dynamics, so people communicating in different ways, but also you're doing that at distance virtually. So, I talked about one of the pillars in my book is challenging conversations. It is so much harder sometimes to have that challenging conversation if you can't just go and say, can we go get a coffee and talk about this? What's going on? Like, that's not so easy. Add to that time differences, the fact that when we work virtually, we've got this obviously huge plethora of communication tools that we can use: Teams, Zoom, Slack for some people, Trello. We've got all these amazing tools that we can use. But the point, if I get really practical for the moment, the point that I bring is, your collaboration tools are just tools. They're not actual communication. So when it comes to working in virtual teams, you actually have to be quite intentional. And I like to think about it in a 360 approach, which means that don't just turn up to your meeting and expect to get good engagement, contribution, conversations going if you've got a really important goal to achieve. You need to be quite intentional with this. Think about 360 is what happens before. How are you going to get people contributing? What are the cultural dynamics that are going to be in the virtual room that mean maybe some people you don't even hear their voice, like they're not comfortable to just unmute and say what they think? How might you need to think about other contribution tools where people can even contribute anonymously and feel safer to do that? So that's an important part of planning, thinking about how do you engage. During, you need to be super aware if you're leading that meeting about who's dominating the meeting and who you're not hearing from. So you've got to be really, it's easy around the table to do that. But when you're in the virtual room, sometimes you only hear from 2 or 3 people. If you are a leader or you're somebody leading that meeting, it's your responsibility to think about, okay, how do I get people talking? How do I get to hear from those voices that are not saying anything regularly? And then afterwards, some people need time to reflect on what they're hearing, on what's being said. If you are not hearing from all the voices, part of that might be about in the follow up, in the conversation that happens after the meeting. Does this take time? Of course, and I'm not going to lie about that. But the point is, we have to be quite intentional. We have to slow down to speed up sometimes. And in virtual teams, you can't just assume that a short 20-minute, 30-minute meeting is always going to work. For some purposes, yes. But in other contexts, actually, you need to create the moment of connection, understanding what is going to work in the engagement in the meetings.
That's really powerful and very useful. Thanks very much.
No worries. Yeah.
So, as we sort of draw to a close, as we are concentrating on global and the international environment, perhaps you've got some thoughts here about the value of international experience and how people can build that into their career path and really have the confidence to go for that next international assignment or take that promotion. What would you say to encourage people to really go for that international experience? And indeed, how important do you think it is in this day and age?
I think, yeah, there's a really important set of questions we should be asking ourselves here and now. And, from my perspective, I feel that international experience always deepens somebody's lived experience as a leader or in their career. It's incredibly vital because it's putting you in new contexts, new challenges. That's going to stretch your capabilities, stretch your ability to understand how to be a good leader, how to connect with people effectively, how to engage and motivate people towards goals, towards a vision. my experience with really quite a variety of organizations and sectors, from luxury fashion to construction, from retail to finance and tech, really I've seen it all. And what I've seen is those individuals who lean into those experiences, whether it is fully relocating, partially relocating and traveling regularly, or whether it's being the leader of incredibly diverse teams around the world, they ultimately benefit from this, because what they're getting is they're developing their cultural intelligence. They're moving beyond the knowledge and the theory of it to lived experience. And that brings richness that is deeply valued in these global organizations, where actually that ability to understand other people's perspectives, have the empathy, to be able to really not only have the emotional intelligence, but the cultural intelligence to navigate these tricky, challenging situations. This ultimately always pays back dividends for people's careers in what I have seen. I've seen people get promoted. I've seen them expand their roles. I've seen them move into new organizations and go further and higher. So ultimately, for me, this is a fantastic opportunity.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. So obviously a very good way of encapsulating everything is to buy yourself a copy of Become a Global Leader. So how can people get hold of your book,
Well,
Victoria?
thank you very much for inviting people to do that. So, the book, Become a Global Leader, of course, available on Amazon around the world. You're also really welcome, if you want to just discover a bit more about the book, come and have a look on my website. It's culturecuppa.com/book. And you're really welcome to have a look. Other ways, people, if you can't find it anywhere, then do come and reach out to me. I'm very active on LinkedIn, sharing my thoughts, strategies, and ideas over there pretty much on a daily basis during the week. So people are really welcome to follow me there as well.
Well, thank you very much, Victoria. We've really enjoyed our conversation, and hopefully you'll come back and share some more tips with us again soon. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Fiona.
I've been talking to Victoria Rennoldson, author and coach, and you've been listening to this webinar interview, Becoming a Global Leader, Amplify Your Impact and Communicate Across Cultures. There's on the end slide details of Victoria and how to get hold of her book. And thank you very much for joining us. There are plenty of resources on Relocate Global and Think Global People, and we invite you to enjoy the content and listen to our webinar interviews. Thank you very much.